Hello, and thank you for joining us in Mapping the Zone, a podcast dedicated to a highly fixated review of large, dense books, specifically of the works and context of Thomas Pynchon. My name is Kate. I'm one of the co-hosts.
I'm Cody.
I'm Will.
And I'm Luke.
And this week we are going to be discussing chapter 29 of Again Today. If I sound any particularly more nasally, it is because I'm getting over some kind of plague that is running through the entirety of my staff at work.
I think that's what everybody has at this point. I think I know I had it. Will said he had something.
It's
gotten
so
all of us at this
weird.
point.
It's not the flu. It's not COVID.
Mine was. So, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Not
Yeah.
pleasant, but
Yeah, mine was bacterial, so
Hmm.
I don't know about y'all.
I don't know. The world may never know what it was. But anyway, we're discussing chapter 29. Luke, do you have a summary prepared for us?
Yeah, I do. So Frank and his band find themselves flirting with the Mexican border. But Frank only crosses over once he meets and agrees to team up with Ubal Oust, a fail son from a rich mining family. The two journey to Guanajuato, and Frank goes to work for the Oust family business. However, Frank is plagued by nightmares during the rare hours he actually is able to sleep and is running on fumes by the time Ubal and him are arrested by a militia and thrown in jail. Next, they are led to a new holding cell located quite close to the city's cemetery. They presume that they will be executed at dawn. Frank chooses to sleep the remainder of his life away, but Ubal stays awake and not long enough to greet their new cellmate, another gringo. The gringo proves how drunk he is by rambling about secret tunnels and the end of the world. The situation proves to be less urgently dire than Frank and Ubal initially assumed. Enough time passes that Ubal is able to somehow accrue a small fortune, and their new jail seems to be something akin to a presumably chthonic paradise replete with ostensibly every type of entertainment available topside. Finding out that, like Lou, they are being punished for something done in another dimension, or possibly just back in the USA, only confuses the pair more. Furthermore, neither knows which one was the original transgressor, though Frank seems sure it was him. They learn that their gringo friend Dwayne is locked up and soon for execution for aiding and abetting certain Mexican revolutionaries. Dwayne sobers up enough to offer the Kieselguhr kid, aka Frank, a contract with his associates. Frank does not admit to being the kid, but since everyone thinks he is the kid and he is therefore a target, he agrees to join Dwayne and Ubal when they escape. They free themselves and board a train that is then hijacked by associates of Dwayne's. The leader of the guerrillas has a talking parrot that introduces itself quite memorably, and off the revolutionaries go, away from the train and deeper into the Mexican wilderness. Frank becomes so worn down by life among the anarchists that he pretends to smoke a stick of dynamite, thus scaring everyone off but the parrot, who engages Frank in a conversation that reveals how Frank's skills with dynamite will be pressed into service quite soon. However, the anarchists' plans go awry and they are forced to flee. The guerrillas happen upon some indigenous people and stay behind to help. And some of them, Frank and Ubal, stay behind to help protect them from their mutual pursuers. Soon, Frank and Ubal create a crossfire scenario that sends the local militia back home. Then Frank reveals that he himself is heading back to the good old US of A, but Ubal doesn't want to join him. So though Frank finds companions for his journey soon enough. He talks to the Indians they saved and is introduced to a possible romantic interest. The foursome walk north, and Frank is introduced to a quite large piece of Iceland spar. As he gazes into the crystal, he is given a vision of where to find Sloat Fresno, though there are no clues as to Deuce's whereabouts. The male Indian introduces Frank to the Hikuli cactus, and Frank begins to hallucinate. He is flying around with his Indian lover, then he is wandering an underground labyrinth, only to eventually discover a cave with rain falling inside it. This is where all the water that should fall in the desert actually goes. Frank and his Indian friends part ways, and he kind of aimlessly wanders around, taking in all the Mexican scenery until he encounters Sloat in a cantina and guns his nemesis down.
Thank you. What did we think of this chapter?
It starts so differently than it ends.
That's true.
That's the best way I can describe it. It is, it starts as a sort of ordinary, just character building chapter about Frank trying to just kind of figure out what to do with his life. Gets arrested, and then by the end, it just explodes into this. What really might be the most cathartic part of this book up to this point. Sloat getting killed has always been one of my favorite moments in this book, just because of not just because of the fact that he's an awful person, and it's good to see Frank get that vindication, but the way in which that scene is written, the speed at which it happens, but the length of time it takes to read it. There's such a dichotomy that exists there that makes it so fascinating. It's literally a moment in time that's encapsulated on like a page and a half, I think, or something, of some of the best prose up to this point in this book.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on the way that the chapter ends. For me, this chapter feels, especially the first half of it, feels like pretty aimless. Like, it's interesting enough, but I can't say that, especially with how long it feels like we've been going through the Iceland Spar section and how close we are to getting to the end of the Iceland Spar section. You know, there was certainly a part of me through the kind of, in my opinion, aimless territory of the first half of the chapter where I was like, is this really all that necessary?
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, when that builds to what A is the sort of journey in the second half of the chapter that he's going on, and then how it concludes, for me, that kind of retroactively redeems the whole beginning of the chapter. Because it really does, it feels not just like a culmination of the chapter itself, but it also feels like a really good culmination of how mysticism has been involved with sort of Frank and Reef's relationship to their father after he's died, and also to their kind of quest for vengeance in some way. And so having his sort of eventual revenge being wreaked on Sloat by the end of the chapter come about partially as a result of both the vision and then using mescaline. It feels like a nice sort of capstone for those elements of this section of the book, but then also sort of a continuation of what I assume is going to become sort of a running theme. So it's good. It's a really good, like, self-contained story, or phase of Frank's story in this book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really just enjoy spending time with Frank in this book, if only because he's a little bit less pathological in his tendencies than most of the other characters.
Yeah.
He is, like, doing things that I can imagine a normal person doing in this kind of scenario. And of course, everything's heightened with Pynchon, but it is totally aimless, and I feel similarly, and I felt similarly the first time reading this book, that, like, why are things not moving? Like, a lot of things are poised to happen, and sure, something actually does happen at the end here, but so much of this chapter is essentially like it would be viewed as filler in some of today's modern media discourse. But it is still really fun, and it's the kind of stuff that I think you even if you hated it, which I don't, I think you got to look at it as like, look, folks, do you want Pynchon to write technical, hyper philosophical, and like hyper nerdy stuff that is incredibly hard to parse without reading textbooks alongside it, or do you want like him to talk about what he knows? Because one thing he knows from personal experience is that in northern Mexico, when they say buen, it sounds like you say duen, which makes duen provecho a great pun. And that's the kind of thing that you only get if you've spent time in northern Mexico, is because they soften D like due, and they already soften B and V, and it's the kind of thing that, like, sure, you could learn part of that, from reading like travel guides like he did when he was a younger author. But you can really tell that, in that 10-year period between V and Gravity's Rainbow, he spent a decent amount of time in Mexico. And it's just fun to see his love come out here.
Mhm.
Because like some of the earlier Western tinged chapters feel like pastiches of books, which is fun. I love pastiche, and Pynchon's great at pastiche.
Mhm.
But he's also a really good just author, and for him to just put some of his own experiences and own kind of intuitions of the kinds of things that probably happened during during the Mexican Civil War, it's a fun playground for him. Anywho, the end of the chapter, though, the end of the chapter, I don't know if I feel that kind of satisfaction from it. If anything, it feels hollow almost, but in a way that's very meaningful.
Mhm.
Just we're gonna have to talk about that when we get to the end in
Yeah.
our larger conversation. But it's very, I mean, it's effective, it's moving, it's heavy, and it's deep. So yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of this chapter.
Yeah, I seem to have liked the beginning of this chapter and maybe the middle as well more than y'all. Where I get what you're saying with the aimless thing, but I was just enjoying hanging out with Frank and U-Ball so much that I just didn't really care that much, I guess. I like to use the word love, Will, just because I do feel like this chapter is kind of a love letter to like to rural Mexico, I guess. And it does kind of show, like some of the, like Kerouac wrote some stuff about even on the road has a section that's set in Mexico and some of these same areas, I would assume. Um, and I there's just some really fun small details like I'm struggling with like where exactly they are in the chapter, but like the part about like, oh yeah, for or Christ to return or depart for good. Um, but just like super poetic, and there's a lot of small details in this chapter I really like. I did find it kind of confusing at times, especially like the underground prison that's just like like an underground world, like an underground town. Um, it's a fun idea and stuff. I just kind of, I don't know, it confused me on my first read of this chapter. Um, but yeah, I probably enjoyed this chapter overall, probably more than y'all, just because I enjoyed pretty much all of it. I agree with Will in some ways about the end of the chapter. I mean, we'll get there. It's just for me, I read it as kind of like, Frank throughout this chapter seems pretty depressed, and that doesn't seem to have changed by the end of it. Like he doesn't seem to have, he doesn't. You would think that he would feel some sense of relief or something, and I don't know if he necessarily feels that, but we'll go over that when we get to it. But yeah, overall, I like this chapter a lot. It's one of my favorites so far.
So, the book begins with Frank reading a dime novel of old Mexico featuring gringo evildoers in exile, sudden deaths, a government that has already fallen but did not know it yet, a revolution that would never begin, though thousands were already dying and suffering in its name. This appears to be a reference to the Chums of Chance in Old Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
It is one of the fictional Chums of Chance novels that we get sort of thrown out there in the beginning of the book. We really have not had a good Chums of Chance title liner since that happened, but it would appear to start there. And then as he has been smuggled out of good lord, okay. As he's been smuggled out of his sort of previous disguise and hideout with the Galandronome, he is now finding himself headed down to Mexico, and in particular to be introduced to. Do we think it's U-Ball? U-Ball? This is such a strange name.
Yeah,
U-Ball
I've
Oust.
always seen it as U-Ball, but
U-Ball.
that's me. What do I know?
Yeah. He meets U-Ball Oust. What do we think of this character? Frank's sort of best friend, so to speak, in this chapter at least.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he's an interesting one. I was more fascinated, at least in this part of the chapter, by his uncle. What's his name? Top Lady Oust, who was
Top
apparently
Lady Oust.
conceived in a choir loft during her edition of Rock of Ages, which is hilarious to me. But I mean, it's another one of those great pinch on names. He's we'll get to know a little bit more about him as the chapter goes on, but he is yeah. I mean, he's an interesting character. I think that'll just be best to leave there for right now.
Fair.
I think he is a very fun character, and in a way that's gonna there are some, as we get further into the book, there's gonna be some historical play done with both Jubal and Frank
Mhm.
that we just really can't get into yet at all. Cody's not just being evasive there; it is just
Okay.
Yeah.
it's
Fair
tricky. But he feels so much like one of Pynchon's more self-inserty characters to me.
Yeah,
Um,
I can see that.
Yeah, and one of the few that he doesn't seem to have like hatred for. Like in this,
Yeah.
like if you're gonna read like Inherent Vice's Doc Sportello as like, what if instead of being a novelist, he just decided to open a PI office, and you're gonna read like V's Billy Pilgrim. Nope, different book. Billy
Slaughterhouse
Profane.
5.
Billy Profane. No intentional connection there. If you're gonna read him as like, what if I had just stayed in the Navy and just kept drinking?
Yeah.
If you're gonna do that, then Oust is kind of like, well, what if I had decided to just stick around in northern Mexico and hung out with some of those anarchists you run into out there? Which, based on his books, you kind of get the sense that he might have preferred to have done that than the way that his life went, although I'm sure children make that one of those things you don't want to talk about or think about.
Yeah. Yeah. You kind of lose your ability to go bum around in northern Mexico with anarchists after you have a child.
Yeah, well, not if you're Cormac McCarthy, I guess.
That's fair. If you're Cormac McCarthy, that's fine. It would
Let
also
him
appear
starve.
that if you're Jack Kerouac, you could also do that, although a gentrified version of it, mostly on the West Coast.
Mhm.
There's options, I guess. From here, we learn that Jubal is looking for someone to work on amalgamation work, and that he is specifically going to be headed down to some mines in is it Guanajuato, is how you would pronounce that particular place in Mexico?
Guanajuato.
Guanajuato.
Yeah, the J's kind of
Um,
hit it like an H almost.
Okay.
Guanajuato.
I I'm learning French, which is a whole different,
Oh yeah,
Yep.
set of glottal skills than Spanish is.
yeah.
Guanajuato.
Sorry, one more time.
Guanajuato.
Oh, see, the saddest part is there could have been a real French sentence in the noises that you just made.
Bébé, mais-
Interestingly enough, this is one of the few places in the world where ice and spar can actually be mined from. So, the idea that there would be ice and spar available in the area, as we get to later in the chapter with this giant piece of it, it is a geologically sound location to choose for that. The two of them talk about amalgamation methods for a little bit, and then eventually we lead to our first reference to a key figure of the Mexican Revolution. I think another part of why I felt the way about the early portion of this chapter that I did is there is a lot of references to not necessarily the Mexican Revolution events as they were happening, but rather key figures in and out of them.
Mhm.
And I think that what happened is I sort of ran into a wall of what is responsible, for lack of a better term, research as it relates to relevance in a single episode of a podcast with this.
Yeah.
Because as someone who did not really know much about the Mexican Revolution before reading this chapter, it is one of the most complicated, sort of long drawn out struggle for power or revolution that I have read, in terms of its multiple phases, the key figures that are put, both in levels of power and removed from power at certain points, the way that it would at times be kind of like put together into a cohesive faction of support for one candidate, and then that would break apart into sectarian fighting again. It's very, very complicated, and I am not going to, as I have in episodes past, give like a kind of overall explanation of it, because it's just not super relevant to give the level of detail I normally do to this chapter. And at a certain point, I just had to like stop and put the book down and be like, okay, just a couple of sentences or maybe a paragraph or two about each of these people, and that's where we sort of need to stop. Because it is a very complicated topic. It's a very interesting topic. I would highly recommend people take it up for themselves as they read this chapter, to kind of take these references where they lead. But to try and give you a gestalt of the Mexican Revolution in 5 minutes is very difficult indeed.
Yeah, difficult. It's many people would argue it's still going on. Like,
yeah.
So it's crazy. It's a crazy thing. So yeah, good on you for trying. Dear God. But this is the time I was going to take this moment to recommend anyone listening, because it will continue to come up in the book going forward. Go ahead and do any reading you can on the Mexican Revolution / Civil War, however you want to call it, and check out Mike Duncan's Revolutions podcast on it. If you are the kind of person who doesn't like proper research and needs it fed to you like a baby, he does a pretty good job in general. So that's probably going to be a decent way to get started.
Great recommendations. I figured you would have some knowledge to share as it relates to these references in particular.
You go ahead. Unfortunately, most of mine is going to be more like vague, familiar, like cultural stuff than anything solid. So,
which is also valuable. But what we essentially learn is that there's a man named General Huerta who is particularly anti-vice, and it is a particularly strenuous sort of character in the region that the two characters are about to go to. Huerta was a general of the Mexican army that, in particular, gained a lot of infamy for helping crush the rebellions that were being led by Emiliano Zapata during various phases of the Mexican Revolution. This is pretty early on that this would have been going on. His tactics were incredibly brutal. He would often employ the burning down of whole villages at one time as a way to exercise power in a region or to put down popular revolution that was going on. And often what would happen is he would crush one of these rebellions or be sent to crush one of these rebellions, and the strife that would happen regionally as a result of his arrival would actually make it a more tempting prospect to the government of Mexico at the time to just try and make formal peace with rebelling forces, because what his tactics were doing was going so far outside of the realm of just trying to crush like a guerrilla army to basically punishing the entire region just for existing and allowing this army to exist. He then later came fully to power in the country, not just in a military sense, but in a political sense, in a coup against then President Francisco. How do you say his last name? Will Madero, Madero.
Oh yeah, that's pronunciation. Yeah.
Okay. Came to power in a coup against then President Francisco Madero, with the backing of both the U.S. and the German Empire. Um, so if you're looking for how this kind of connects to some of the broader power struggles at play within Vineland, that would be how the sort of great Western powers were invested in what was going on in Mexico. And his ascension would lead to a military dictatorship over Mexico and a whole new wave of armed conflict in the overall Mexican Revolution or Civil War. While he was recognized by those world powers who helped put him into place, he sought to consolidate local power for recognition with regional government approval. So his idea was like, yes, I was put in place with the support of these world powers, but if I really want to rule the country, I need to kind of have the approval of these different regional governments, and then that will in turn really, really consolidate me as a legitimate leader in Mexico. His administration was pretty much always about expanding powers of the military, though, believing that the only real solutions that were worth trying to any particular problem, be they economic or, socially, was just to use the military. Overall, really bad strategy for him, but unsurprising based upon his background. And as soon as he sort of continued this militarization of the country, it would lead him to refuse elections, and this would end up basically killing his positive relations with the U.S. So his complete sort of tamp down on one of the basic tenets of even a democratic process would end up killing the support that he did have. And that was even worse for him because he had never managed to get the support within the country that he had hoped for. This then would cause him to lose a lot of support just in general from the military that had previously supported him, which was made even worse by bad tactics being applied to a couple of different battles with guerrilla forces in the country. So then, as soon as that happened, as soon as those battles were lost and the Mexican army was losing face as well, he was pretty much alone. And so he resigned the presidency and fled into exile. A lot of historians who write specifically about the Mexican Revolution and this particular period of it, especially because, as Will said, there are some who have arguments to point to the idea that there is still actively a revolution going on in Mexico. He was seen, though, as the overall sort of demon of the revolution between his activities prior to taking the presidency and then his time as the president of Mexico in a very limited capacity. Eventually, when he would go into exile, this would basically unite a lot of these disparate guerrilla armies and revolutionary forces that were kind of together to fight him. They had this sort of, like I had made a reference to, a very kind of subtle peace or a very fragile truce with one another. And as soon as they had succeeded in kicking the government out and in exiling Huerta, they just fell back into fighting each other. So there was a real chance that with this kind of icon of evil that they were fighting against, that it would have created a more unified movement. But unfortunately, they just couldn't make that unification last, and so as a result, it fell apart. That is sort of, to the best of my ability, a overview of the period of history that is necessary to understand to read this chapter. A lot of the stuff in Mexico proper before they will then, venture out and Frank will meet the indigenous people and will have the spiritual experiences that lead to the sort of the death of Sloat by the end of the chapter. All of that is kind of divorced from this context. The context of the revolution and sort of the political struggles in Mexico primarily applies to the early portion of the chapter before they are arrested. Where, like, if you're trying to understand why the kind of atmosphere is so repressive and why there are military police in strange places and why they're arrested for seemingly nothing and why a lot of people are being arrested, it is because of the brutal tactics that were being put in place by General Huerta at this time, which would then feed into his brief stint as the president of Mexico more properly later in the revolution. I say properly merely because he had the title.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can't fact check any of it. Like I said, I haven't. It's been a while since I read anything about it, but best version that I've heard delivered in less than an hour.
So from there, the two friends do make their way down to this mining area. Cody, is this where you want to talk about sort of the thread you pulled on, or do you want to bring that up later?
I will bring that up when we get to page 378 because that's the first mention of El Palacio de Cristal.
As is kind of the case in a lot of Pynchon's sort of Western pastiche chapters or chapters about Mexico or the Southwest in total, there's a lot of great writing as he describes these places that they go to. There will be a lot of great writing about nature over the course of this chapter. That's one of its really big hallmarks. But one of the quotes that I really like here on 376 is, at the Guanajuato station, the North Americans puffing on Veracruz puros descended from the coach into an afternoon rainstorm, loping to shelter beneath an ungalvanized shed roof that was being so battered by the downpour that no one under it could hear her talk. Where the roof had rusted through, water descended almost wrathfully. A couple pesos worth of zinc could have squared this away, the thing, Frank commented, and Jubal, unable to hear him, shrugged. They are approached by purveyors of chewing gum, sunglasses, straw hats, fire opals, and shockingly young women, by children offering to carry their gear and shine their boots, by hopefully loitering hotel trap drivers, with thoughts on where they should sleep tonight, all of whom they were able to refuse with a politely wagging finger. The old stone city smell of livestock, well water, sewage, sulfur, and other byproducts of the mining and smelting of silver. They could hear sounds from all invisible parts of the city, voices, ore mills, bells of the churches striking the hours. Sounds echoed off of the stone buildings and the narrow streets amplified them. It's just such a great. We've mentioned this a lot, but in particularly over the course of this book because there's so many different locations. But it's another example of just these great couple paragraphs to maybe a page that Pynchon spends just describing for you is kind of the sensory experience of being in a place.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that helps set not just the scene but also the tone in how the place that he is going is distinctly different from the minds of the places that his father worked at and that he worked at. There was still bad conditions, there was still labor struggles going on there, but broadly there was not this sense of like caravans of traders or of maybe an impoverished situation for a lot more people. And that distinction, I think, is important, especially for the time that this is taking place in, but also for kind of what is going to happen to these characters as they go through.
Even the paragraph before what you read out is really beautiful as well.
Mm-hmm.
That whole page is really nice. I really like the beginning of that paragraph too. So that reads, "So iron on iron, and headlong as fate." I don't necessarily know what headlong as fate means, but it's evocative, and I love the iron on iron thing.
Yeah, that description of the rain coming down on the iron roof, it creates an atmosphere in which you can't hear people talk. If you've never experienced a heavy rainstorm under a metal roof, it is exactly that. It is deafening. So that's a very visceral description of that particular thing, and it really lends a lot to what that situation would have been. It's just great descriptive writing.
Yeah, and there's a lot of it. I mean, it continues as he actually starts working through on the 377. He gets a job, and we kind of get the sense that this relationship that he's made with Jubal is deepening, and at this point, he starts having these, as he puts it, short, intense dreams, nearly always about Deuce Kindred. And this is really where like the spiritual stuff starts in the chapter, which is my favorite stuff of this chapter. Mm-hmm. This idea that he is presenting Frank and kind of his whole family, at least the kind of an older two men that we spend the most time with, because Kit's doing his own thing. as being really haunted by their father. And I especially love the description from a couple of chapters ago now about how it feels like he is not just haunted by his father, but that one of his father's children has this like lineage of all the other murdered industrial anarchists and union men with them. That there's just like this whole kind of tribe of ghosts following them. And this is another case of just how that mindset is so ingrained in him that this is just what he's thinking about. Everything he's doing is pushing towards eventually figuring out a way to find what he thinks will be justice for his father, but revenge for the killing of his father. And it's just each instance of it is really great. But this idea of just being taunted by your father's killer, and that like I'm miles and miles away, setting you up just to believe that you're already off track from where you tried going to start with, but now you've just put yourself incredibly off course with the situation that you're in. It's very good sort of character writing for putting the reader in the headspace that he's in at this point.
That's a lot of important, valuable insight. If you don't mind, I'd like to bring us down to the trivial.
Sure.
So I didn't contribute much to the U-Ball oust name discussion, because this is the point where I think it's insightful to bring it up. We get the name of at least the Mexican side of the Oust family fortune is invested in Empresas Ustianas, which the Pynchon Wiki helpfully translates as what it is, Austian Enterprises, and it's quite a bit like Faustian Enterprise, and again, the part of the whole Pynchon self-insert thing is that he's a descendant of old money. Oust is Pynchon, and so in this you have and the Pynchon Wiki also does at least some decent etymology talk on U-Ball, and I think it's kind of funny that they didn't mention that U is ancient Greek prefix these days for good. So he's just like he's like if Faust was a good egg. He's going off. He's going to help out the anarchists and abandon the alchemy that his family does in their silver mining operation.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Very trivial though. So
I do really love the paragraph about that starts with Impressus Ustianus with like the dream sequence and stuff. It does remind me of Borges a little bit with some of the imagery. I've been thinking about one of the reasons I like this chapter is that it does seem to have, and that paragraph is an example I would say of this. It has elements of like the acid western genre. Which I'm not like an expert in, but I have seen the Jodorowsky directed examples of that genre, and it does have some. I do feel like if there's one filmmaker from the 60s and 70s that I'm pretty sure Pynchon has seen at least one movie by. I mean, other than like maybe Robert Altman or something, I would think it would be like Jodorowsky. I would think that Pynchon would probably be aware of Jodorowsky. But that's kind of a more general thing. But I mean, that small paragraph is also kind of it's hallucinatory. It has the whole like like desert as mystical place thing kind of. I mean, it's a little bit, and there are like urban aspects of it, but it's clearly something that happens in a desert. I don't know. I just really like that paragraph in general too.
Yeah, it's really great. And the sort of acid westernness of it all, the visions and everything, lead Frank to believe that something at the top of this hill relates to his goal of finding Deuce. And so him and U-Ball go up there, and they are arrested for seemingly going up there. There is no there is no trial. There is no court hearing. There's nothing like that. They are brought into jail, despite Yuval's best efforts to kind of waylay this from happening. And we're given a good description of their cell here, which is the cell was a little roomier than one of the ones in Yugado, with a couple of cornhusk mattresses and a slop bucket and a huge unflattering cartoon of Don Porfirio Diaz charcoaled across the wall. Scenes they wouldn't shoot us till sunup, Frank says. Guess I'll snuggle in with the Chinches here for a while. I apologize in advance for any of my Mexican or Spanish pronunciation. I'm just it's not a language I know anything about. But the reference to Porfirio Diaz is the president of Mexico at the time that General Huerta is serving the interests of. So if you're wanting to know who he is, that is basically who was in power of the country at the time. He served in office for a really, really long time. He was a very famous Mexican general, and then eventually the dictator of Mexico from 1876 until his overthrow in 1911. He also seized power by a military coup. In total, he had served as president of Mexico for 3 different terms. And if I'm not mistaken, still is the longest period of any Mexican ruler or president or anything. Those sort of years of service. And he was a very pro-industry, pro-military, anti-union guy. So it is very much purposeful that Thomas Pynchon is picking this period of history to kind of call upon, not just because, of course, it's concurrent with where the rest of his book is at, but the political issues in America and abroad were also political issues in Mexico at the time, and were underlying causes for a lot of the fighting and revolutions that would happen during this period. So it is very much another iteration of this sort of idea that as we push towards modernity across the globe at this point in history, the kind of same issues keep cropping up. It's just sort of a little bit different. Sometimes the areas are more impoverished. Sometimes the working conditions are even worse. It is an interesting juxtaposition in that regard, but the political struggle is effectively the same when you get down to the ideology of it.
Shh. Shh. That line on the map is real. Shh.
Yep. Yep. It is 100% what Pynchon is talking about in Mason and Dixon.
These are fun books with nothing political.
There is nothing real to be gleaned out of any of these words. I'm high off cough medicine. I'm not making any
coincidence.
There's a really great, to this effect of what I just talked about. There's a really great quote here on 379 that starts with "The end of the world is coming soon." Does someone want to read that?
End of the world is coming soon, you see. This last time across, riding out of Tucson, you could hear it in the air, all the way to Nogales and over the frontera. Never quit. Kind of roar, beasts overhead, bigger than anything you ever ran into. Wings moving against the moon like clouds. Suddenly it all goes dark and you're not sure if you want it to pass too quick, or when the light comes back, who knows what you'll see up yonder.
So just a really great evocation of the idea that the world is ending soon, and I underline all that, and I said, in a Pynchonian sense, the end is coming soon.
Yeah.
That like the kind of final death of magic, the arrival of modernity, all of that is like right over the horizon. And it's really solid that this comes as a kind of, again, culmination of a lot of the elements of this section of the book about the strange sort of atmospheric patterns that the Chums of Chance are picking up on, the signals about World War I, the continuing sort of increase in the largesse of the sort of top 1%. All of these things are what is being referenced here. And if you've been doing a close reading, if you've been sort of doing your homework like Pynchon hopes that you will, it will become very clear that this sense of the end, or this sort of sense of foreboding energy, is very clear, especially in this particular chunk of the book. I would imagine it continues on, but there's going to be a climax at some point. So for it to be, building in this way, it's just really good construction on Pynchon's, part. How these chapters flow together, why it is that it feels like all of these different encyclopedic elements are there. It's there because, in a sense, it all was coming to the end. Like my guess is that the end is World War I. That's what I'm guessing. I don't know what's in the rest of this book, but it really feels like he is making an argument for that being the kind of apocalyptic moment of culmination for all of these different things that he is talking about. The bimetallic system, the rise of Marxism, and in certain places the kind of prefiguring of fascism, in other places the private interests, all of that. This quote really seems to, for me, sum up a lot of the thematic writing and particularly the historical research that Pynchon must have been doing in order to write this book.
Well, and that particular section reminds me quite a bit, conveniently, of that Mason and Dixon warrior path moment, and it's clearly talking about something different, and talking about a different kind of interaction with that kind of flow of, spirits, or whatever the heck this is in particular.
Yeah.
But it is that same kind of thing where with Mason and Dixon, we didn't see the end of it. We only saw the possible ending.
Yeah.
We only saw the idea of it, really. But here we're getting kind of like the last bits of it flowing out of the land, it seems.
Yeah. I don't think that there's a week that goes by that I don't think about that section of Mason and Dixon and the way that it's written. And Cody, we've reached the point of reference that you wanted.
Yeah, so, and it did come up again a little bit later in the chapter, but the mention on page 378 of El Palacio de Cristal, I don't know how I didn't pick up on this the last few times that I've read this book. There is no mention of this on the Pynchon Wiki, but there is so to kind of back this up a little bit, Mexico, especially the sort of central through line of it, is on a fault line, and so there's a lot of these caves that exist within that area that are basically magma chambers that have hollowed out, and the kind of, I guess, just the natural circumstances which exist in that area have allowed for the growth of these gigantic crystals, and they're usually either selenite or gypsum or some form of quartz or spar. So it's understandable that this comes up in this section of the book, and that Frank has found some spar, and that there's a lot of talk about caves that have these crystals in them. What sets this one apart, and the reason that name El Palacio del Cristal caught my attention, is because the cave of the crystals, which is situated up near Nica, in Chihuahua, Mexico, which is where, by the end of this chapter, that's essentially where they are, is the home to the largest selenite crystals that exist in the world. The cave itself is so inhospitable to human survival if you do not have specialized equipment, which is essentially like a specialized suit that runs ice cold water through it. You can really only last about 10 minutes in here. The crystals themselves, I just from looking at pictures of it, can get up to about 40, 50 feet tall. I don't even know what the diameter would be of them, but it is insane. It has an almost 100% humidity level, and it reaches temperatures of about 136 degrees. It is a sight to behold, and it would make sense that this would be something that they were familiar with at that time, because this cave system was found around 1910, and it was starting to be used at that time to extract silver, and it's actually still one of the largest silver mining operations in the world. A lot of the silver that is distributed out from the world comes from that specific area of Mexico. But I can't help but think that because the discovery of the actual cave of crystals itself came much later, I think around 2000, it kind of lines up when Pynchon might have been finishing up some things on this book, and would make for a really good insert to kind of tie all that in. It was already known at the time that there were caves that had gypsum and spar quartz in plentiful supply. But this particular cave and the way that it's structured and the way that it is described makes me think that he found a way to tie it in and make it into this kind of mythical place that exists within the world of Against the Day.
And how did you come across that? Did you just Google the word from the book?
No, I've known about this cave for a long time. I have a weird thing with like natural phenomenon and especially like cave formations and stuff. As much as I hate going into caves, I am fascinated by them. So stuff like this and like Oak Island up in Nova Scotia is really interesting to me as well. Just those kind of bizarre anomalies that exist in nature, I'm always just kind of fascinated by. So when that name popped up, for whatever reason, my brain finally clicked and was like, oh yeah, remember that giant cave, or that cave of crystals in Mexico? So I jumped in and started looking into it. I was like, oh yeah, that lines up, because if you look at the path that they take, where they are right now in Guanajuato, is further down south in Mexico towards the center of the country, and they are working their way north towards Chihuahua, which runs along that fault line on which a lot of these caves are situated, and specifically Cave of the Crystals is in Chihuahua at the Nika mine, which is essentially their ultimate destination. So
Nice. You have an intellectual interest in caves, but not an experiential one.
no, I have an experiential one. I am claustrophobic as hell.
Oh, sure.
I don't like being in. I like to appreciate them, and then I get in there and I'm like, no, this was a bad idea.
You're doing opposition research.
Yeah.
As the duo settle into sort of a routine, so to speak, at the jail, there's a comment here about money mysteriously appearing in Yubal's pockets. What did anyone have any thoughts on that, and how it seems that he's then able to use that money for like bribes and stuff to help their situation, but I wasn't really able to make heads or tails of what that might mean. The fact that suddenly his pockets are appearing stuffed with cash.
I don't have an answer to that. I was curious about that myself.
Yeah, I mean, I could, one sec. I don't know. It could be as simple as essentially like people know who's employing a lot of folks in the area, and they know that Yubal might be able to swing something for them on the outside once he gets out, because he's a gringo, and
Sure.
yeah, there's a war going on, but he's a gringo whose dad owns the biggest employer in the region. Probably he's going to be okay.
That's
an
excellent read. We're then treated to another sort of description of life in prison that is written very well, and there is a reference here to given the national politics at the moment unfolding, the other detainees here seemed more like, what would you call them, honest working stiffs with a dangerous light in their eyes. So there's a sort of a comment at the beginning of that paragraph about how they expected it to be more like religious extremists that were being locked up, but instead it's just sort of average everyday folks. Again, this is a reference to what was going on with the kind of Mexican Revolution and the put down of a lot of forces in the country at the time, including just people. All of these people that would get rounded up by General Huerta and thrown into prison, a lot of them were just normal people, because even if you maybe weren't part of one of these guerrilla armies, a good chunk of these guerrilla armies were staffed with farm workers, industrial workers, just regular people. And so in a lot of cases, if you were showing any kind of interest in organization, or if you were in one of those industries, you would also get thrown into one of these prisons. So it is just an accurate evocation of who was being directly harassed and suppressed at the time by those forces. From here, it's kind of just a lot of just sort of the day-to-day life in prison. Frank does have another dream here, where he finds as it quotes, molten-eyed Sergeant Vasquez at the door with a breakfast tray of chilled papayas and limes. So we know that he's still kind of having these dreams, but there's not really much content to them. And I think that this is where some of the difficulty in how to talk about the first part of this chapter presents itself, in that
Mhm.
it is just kind of a lot of like, this is a weird situation that the two of them are in. They can't exactly leave, but they're also well taken care of. I think Will's read about it being as a result of his connection to kind of the wealthiest family in town or in the region is probably accurate. That would explain why they're maybe getting such good food in prison and things like that. But a lot of it is sort of just kind of background stuff waiting for when they eventually leave. There is, of course, a reference on page 381 to the PLM. This was a pro-worker political party that was in opposition to President Diaz, um, also known as Partido Liberal Mexicano. And from there, eventually, we do leave the prison. I don't want to get there quite yet because there is, of course, a reference to the idea that perhaps Frank is the Kieselger kid. But before we get into that and how it transitions out of the prison, do we have any other thoughts on their couple page stay behind bars? I really struggled to kind of mine a lot of like significant consequence out of the quotes that we've kind of already talked about through this early portion of the chapter.
Well, I wanted to highlight the similarity between the scene of Frank kind of coming to realize that most of the people in this prison are like essentially there by accident.
Yeah.
How similar that is to the scene of Lou when he gets to the anarchist church, or however.
The chapel that he goes to.
Yeah. However,
Yeah.
we talked about that when back in like the third episode of this podcast
years ago.
Yeah.
That's a good point. It is the same realization.
Yeah, it's very similar there, and it really does speak to kind of that divide that the last chapter we covered in the last episode of the show, that really focused on that division between that high level, and in this context talking about like the Mexican Revolution, what's going on amongst all these different parties versus what's going on amongst the people, because these are not party members who are arrested. Of course, there are plenty of them who are. I'm sure some of those scientists are. I'm sure some of the farmers are, but most of them are just people who were like, this is the right thing for me to secure a meal tomorrow, and ended up in jail, and they're going to go down in history as one of a list of Zapatistas or whatever particular bloc they were part of by accident of history. They're going to be framed as that in hindsight, even though it's whether it's a real or a false division, it's not a division that they live.
There's two things I wanted to go over. The capitalization of other side. I mean, the pension wiki links that to like another dimension and stuff, like with kind of what Lou goes through, which is kind of what I mentioned in my summary as well. And whenever I first read this chapter, that's kind of where my mind went on its own. Anyway, it was just some type of like forgotten sin or something, like some transgression from his past. But the capitalization of other side occurs later in the chapter to refer to like the other side of the border, as in America, or the U.S. rather.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting, and I do think that is kind of meant to highlight how different it can be to go from the U.S. into Mexico as opposed to like the U.S. into Canada, perhaps. Where I mean, I feel the culture shock if you go to Canada is going to be a little bit more, or perhaps significantly more subtle. From at least that's been my experience from going to the two countries. Yeah, I also kind of struggle with like why. I mean, I guess it could be obviously political, but why it would matter if he had done something bad in America, in the U.S., why he would be in prison in Mexico. Either one of them. And forgive me if we've already been over this, but Frank's little dream sequence, does seem to be very clearly be like a reference to the Chums of Chance. The conveyance, whose actual working principles were mysterious to him. Like a lot of, I think we've gotten two different propulsion systems for the Inconvenience is what it's called, correct?
Yes.
And both of them are not. I don't think either of them would either have even been done today. I think both of them are completely fictional. So yeah, those two details I found worth kind of getting into a little bit more.
Yeah, fair point. Before they make their breakout, though, there is a revelation that they were expecting Frank to break them out with dynamite hidden somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why they're expecting this is because all of them are convinced that he is the Kieselger kid. Do we have any particular thoughts on this kind of mix up between him and who we maybe presume is his father? It's just kind of an interesting thing that's attributed to him. Of course, the kind of key connection between this and the prior chapter is that apparently the only reason Bob Meldrum didn't kill him is because he thought he was the
scared him.
Kieselger kid.
Yeah.
To which Frank is quite proud that he put some of the fear into such a legendary figure of the Wild West.
Yeah.
But do we have any thoughts on the kind of mix up between him and the kid as it presents itself in this chapter?
I mean, the only thing I can kind of think is that in his pursuit of Deuce and Sloat, just his general kind of revenge arc to avenge his father's death. I think Frank has kind of maybe in a way, I guess, assumed parts of his dad's identity to the point where he kind of looks maybe a little bit more like him or carries himself like him in such a way that would lead to people thinking he was him. Just because everything that these people know about the Kiesler kid, despite the people who say, "Oh yeah, I saw him," like probably didn't. It's all legend. It's all myth. It's all just folk tales and campfire tales and things like that. So he might be at this point just in the course of trying to avenge his father, sort of subsuming his father's character and carrying himself that way, so that people see him and think, "Oh, that he's like that description. He's probably the Kiesler kid."
Sure.
Yeah, that's kind of how I was thinking about it along slightly similar lines, though. I didn't take land from your ancestors. You know, he's he's the son of the guy who probably inspired most of the stories. He's the brother of the other guy who probably inspired a lot of the stories. He probably honestly I read it as him looking like Reef more than his father, just because something about that made more sense to me, but I don't think it matters. In any case, he is a gringo explosives engineer who
Yeah.
has sympathies with trade unionists and anarchists. Whether or not he's the Keiselger kid, or whether he is just another white dude who has those political tendencies, to these people, it doesn't really matter. And I don't even mean that in the sense of and I certainly don't bring up I didn't steal anyone's land parallel to say, well, they're being unreasonable. Why don't they take the time? The point is that it doesn't matter. The point is that he has the know-how and he has the inclinations, whether he is the same person or not. Is that relevant? Is he gonna help them or not? Is he gonna break them out or not? Is he gonna live that Keiselger kid life, or is he just gonna ride on his old man's coattails like Yubi over there?
Or can they potentially guilt trip him by association into doing it for them anyway?
Exactly. And what is the difference between that and Webb or Reef, who we know have engaged in some Keiselgering? What's the difference between that inclination and the inclination of these people who have taken that step to say, well, this is who I am, I need to do this. Instead, it's just a bunch of other people saying, this is who you are, you need to do this. And what's the difference?
The Kieselger kid is truly a spirit that inhabits a body rather than it being one particular person.
Mm-hmm.
So the group of the anarchists and Frank do break out of the prison, and they do end up with them their freedom being afforded them by the route of a train, and as Frank is riding with the anarchists, as he says, he is not really sure what to do. He would apparently be more comfortable with bandits because, well, they will, kick or cut or punch or spit or shoot you. They won't try and play around with dynamite. To which the Mexican anarchists admit that they really don't know what they're doing. They just steal a couple sticks of dynamite every once in a while and throw them around and abandon. And that essentially, like Will is talking about, this is sort of almost a mantle they're hoping that he'll step into, because they would like him to blow up the presidential palace for them, which is just, you're really taking a big moonshot in trying to get someone to do that for you in particular.
Hey, if you don't mind.
It's a really, really funny moment there. And especially because they don't even give him time to prepare for that. They just say they want him to do it tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Just a quick presidential palace bombing. Yeah.
Routine.
This, of course, this sort of mix-up is also supported by a lot of the thematic idea of doubling in this book. The Kieselguhr kid isn't just one person, it's at least two, if not three. And there's a line here on 387 where it refers to the silver mines that are full of espato, double refracting all the time, and not only light rays, cities too, people, parrots. You just keep floating along in that gringo smoke cloud, thinking there's only one of everything, Huevon. You don't even see those strange lights all around you. I Chihuahua. In fact, I Chihuahua. Kid engineers, all alike. Closed minds, always been your problem, given in at length to parrot hysteria, sinister in its prolonged indifference. So again, it's of course another method of restating the same point about Iceland Spar, which does annoy me slightly, but I think it works better here than it has in some of the other later chapters of this section, because it is directly being used in a portion of the chapter that is about one sort of identity fitting multiple people. So I think it is more kind of directly supported or undergirded by what is happening on the page itself. But it is, again, another statement of how this chapter relates to this idea of Iceland Spar and what Iceland Spar does, and how it is able to double refract to create a whole new reality. And if you're ignoring it, it's because you're just sort of a engineer who is too much to the modern side of thinking and doesn't have enough of the kind of magic left in them. So again, another looping back of these same ideas. This chapter's very good connective tissue, even if the prison sequence doesn't have much to it.
Mm-hmm. And I love that all of this also comes from a seemingly recurring element of Pinch on books of the intimidating bird character, whether it's the mechanical duck or Joaquin here, the insanely foul-mouthed parrot. But yeah, that's one of my favorite quotes in this chapter that you just read there. I love that. I think it's absolutely central to everything that's going on in the story, and that really hammers down on that doubling effect of the spar and what it's doing in the story, and that loss of magical identity and feeling is just so crucial to everything before this and going forward as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of the parrot, I think my favorite sentence in this whole book so far is giving in at length the parrot hysteria, sinister in its prolonged indifference.
Yeah.
It's just a great fucking sentence.
It really is.
And I mean, like parrots, I haven't really spent much time around talking birds in general, but from just stuff on social media, and I think I did go to a nature reserve where they had talking birds that they had to keep away from the public because tourists had taught them cuss words. So it was like this whole thing of whether or not they would be let out and if they would say the cuss words or not. But like parrots do, and talking birds do seem to kind of have a sense of humor that does seem to involve a lack of empathy, maybe. Maybe not like a severe lack of empathy, but just they seem to find stuff funny. Like they kind of troll. They seem to be kind of like internet trolls or like trolls a little bit. Just from my few experiences with them. And to go back a little bit, I did find it interesting that Frank was so depressed on the train. Just because, like the whole like U-Ball getting money thing, there's not a lot on the page for like motivations or like why that's happening. Like his two compatriots, like say, "Hope you're not in love, Compinche," and then you're being haunted. Every sign of it, something in your notorious past needs to be taken care of. And then Frank seems to blame it on them thinking that he's the kid. But it does occur to me that Frank is probably still grieving his father's death, and that could explain a lot of kind of why he is so aimless and so like not enthusiastic just kind of throughout this chapter.
Yeah.
But that's never stated, so I do find that interesting. That Pynchon can kind of like leave these areas of interpretation where like he doesn't even offer like there's other authors I can think of who do that. The other authors I can think of who do that typically at least give some type of clue or some clues. Whereas I feel like there's a lot that's open to interpretation in this chapter.
Yeah. I mean, it is also good, just like good character writing too. Like it doesn't necessarily require the indication. Like that A, his father's dead, but then also B, that his chances so far at getting any sort of revenge or, as he would see it, justice for his father has involved him being led around by a mass murderer in a town in Colorado, being railroaded into a mariachi band because he needs to leave town before the mass murderer mass murders him, and then going down to Mexico, briefly having a good job, and then being thrown into political imprisonment, and then being forced to break out with anarchists because they want him to bomb something for them. Like he's firmly been struggling since his father died. And I think that you're right, Luke. I think a lot of lesser writers, in terms of kind of construction and entrusting the reader, would maybe feel it to be a necessity to restate those points. But in this case, Pynchon just sort of trusts the reader to do the thought work or to figure that out. And it's one of the nice things about it that he's not always indicating. He's leaving that space for interpretation.
And even ignoring like the stuff leading up to this chapter. I mean, the guy's it's been like a nightmare screwball comedy plotline so far. Like you kind of said, Kate. It's just been a horrible weekend in a lot of ways so far. Like it reads like, well, bet you're wondering how I got here.
Yeah.
Like that's where he's at mentally at this point after, at probably weeks of just being shuffled along without any real choice of anything and just being taunted constantly in his dreams.
Just riding the rail with these anarchists. Despite that said depression, they do decide to try and rob some dynamite. However, that does fail conclusively. As soon as they show up, a gunfight begins between Frank and the anarchists and U-Ball and all of the sort of mystery army that could be mine guards, could be Juaristas, could be anybody. They can't tell. And so they choose to leave off the kind of heist and make their way back to their camp, only for them to then find that the actual Juaristas are coming for them now. So the prison break has been noticed. General Huerta has sent forces after them, and another gunfight breaks out. And so Frank and U-Ball just decide to kind of blow for Dodge or Durango, as it might be, and they start to head north. And eventually they run into a group of indigenous people. How do you pronounce what that tribe of people is called, Will?
Pretty sure it's Tarahumara.
Do you have any sort of background information you want to give on them?
The only knowledge I have is so vague and like just from associations that I wouldn't feel responsible saying anything.
Okay.
They are definitely like the Pynchon Wiki points out, they're the ones who are shown in the White City, taking the peyote and having the fits, and they are associated with peyote. But I believe they're mostly just the nomadic people who, used to be a lot more populous along that part of Mexico.
And again, your mentioning of them being among the exhibits of the White City is another example of how this chapter does so much reincorporation work to the early portions of the book and to the thematic intent of the book. So you also did mention that they're associated with peyote. He will eventually consume some peyote with them, but he kind of meets this family, him and Yuval do, and not before they separate from each other, right? Or is it a little bit?
They're still with the anarchists when they meet them.
Yeah, Frank goes off with the indigenous. Do the anarchists don't follow with them
No.
by then though? Yeah, so he chooses to go his separate ways with this indigenous family, but not before there is a line here that says, "You go north, we do too. Let us go together for a while with permission. You may find something you have been looking for." So again, this idea that something is looming over the horizon. He's searching for something. He got arrested because he was searching for something. His dreams are all pointing to him searching for something, and that person is Deuce Kindred. Do we have any thoughts on the sort of indigenous family more proper as characters before we get into his eventual sort of vision quest?
I didn't have anything on him, no.
Okay.
I particularly like the interaction where they're making acquaintance, where it's clear Frank has heard all the stories. What happens when you save one of these Indians' lives? They hold it against you. Ugh. And so he's trying to deny all possible agency he had in their lives being saved, and they're just like, "Cool, we'll travel with you for a while," and that's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's what you call good representation, I think. But no,
Yeah.
he Espinero is kind of an interesting character in that he is so oblique and he's just kind of screwing with Frank, and I like spending time with them.
The comic relief of them in this chapter is very funny. Really reminds me of the Parks and Rec character who at every opportunity, I don't remember his name, but the casino owner who at every opportunity just tries to guilt trip white people is how a lot of the dialogue here seems to come across. And so, yeah, they begin to make their sort of journey. There is this kind of undercurrent of I don't know. Is it real sexual tension? What is it with the indigenous woman, where it seems like the two of them, their connection or supposed connection over these pages is very interesting. It of course doesn't come to anything. I don't know if it's another extension of them messing with him or anything like that, but it's another just sort of interesting slants to these pages.
Yeah, the Tarahumara were like seen as being like in the horrible race science of yesteryear to the setting of this chapter. They were singled out as like being especially primitive because they were like the kinds of nomadic people who didn't wear very many clothing. and there's a little bit of a mention of dressed for the trail, meaning hardly at all. You couldn't say she was a chore to look at.
Yeah.
So I read the pointing out at first as like, sorry, I read their meet cute, I guess, if you want to call it that, where Estrella is like, I don't know if you're supposed to take it as sarcastic or a sincere compliment, pointing out Frank's penis. And I read it at first as just like, okay, what the hell, Pinchin, come on. I'm dying on so many hills. I'm dying on all these hills on this damn podcast, trying to like defend a man who grew up 80 years before I was born. But on reflection, it does also seem like the kind of thing that for a like 16-year-old would be really funny to screw with people who wore more clothing.
Mhm.
To just be
Yeah.
like, I can still see your body parts. You know that, right? You're not actually hiding it.
That's really good. Yeah, that's a very good explanation of that chunk. The indigenous sort of caravan here takes him to a giant piece of Iceland spar, perhaps the biggest that we have yet seen. And this is also a really interesting section of the chapter, because they bring him up to the sort of piece of calcite, and they tell him that if he looks into it, he'll see things. And this is the first time that it feels like, if I'm not mistaken, that Iceland Spar has been explicitly used not for a lens over something specific, but for a lens effectively into another world or something like that. Like, it's not used to show something that's already there. It's used to kind of bridge the gap between where Frank is and where something else is, or some other place.
Right.
So it is, again, it feels like it is an escalation and reincorporation of a lot of the elements over the course of this chunk of the book, that being this like subsection of it. And it is something that really feels like Pynchon, again, pushing one of these elements forward. The amount of reincorporation that is in this chapter through this character is really smart, because it's hard to connect a lot of this stuff together when it's taking such an encyclopedic lens on a lot of things.
Yeah, and it's important, I think, especially with what you mentioned about this being the first time that it has been shown to work in a non-scientific manner, because if we have to remember who's showing him this. So like in previous instances in which we've been exposed to the calcite, it's always in a scientific setting. It's always Professor Vanderjuice, or it's always like the Chums of Chance, or somebody in a scientific capacity is utilizing it as a scientific tool. But here it's an indigenous person using it for, I don't want to say mystical purposes, but more natural purposes, more grounded earthly purposes, to divine something or to see something somewhere else. So it's more connected to the earth itself, and that magical realism that exists in this America that exists in the book.
Yeah.
And that's like really kind of hammered on in that paragraph, where it's, Frank had been looking at calcite crystals for a while now through nickel prisms of lab instruments whose names he'd forgotten, among the chats or zinc tailings of the Lake County mines, down here in the silver lodes of Veta Madre and so forth. And he doubled anything like this piece of spar had ever been seen on Earth, maybe since the early days up in Iceland itself. Yes, quite a specimen, all right. A twin crystal, pure, colorless, without a flaw, each identically mirrored half about the size of a human head in what Ubal would call a scalenohedral habit. And there was this deep glow, though not enough ambient light in here to account for it, as if there were a soul harbored within. So I think for me, and I think what Pynchon's trying to get at with this particular instance of the calcite being used, is that connection that it has to the earth, and it's being retained by this group of people. They are using it for its natural purpose rather than using it as a scientific tool and sort of sterilize.
Could not have said it better myself.
And just to make it a little bit more of a toy interpretation even. Like it's literally in the mines, and there's no clarification, but the fact that Espinero led him into the mine, I would assume it's still embedded in the ground or the wall of the mine.
Yeah, that was how I read it.
Yeah.
So he's literally looking into the earth with it. It is
Yeah.
He is literally like in the same way that it bifurcate the Argentarum or whatever. It's bifurcating the planet in this way. And it is also the first time I think we've seen, aside from the kind of assumed context in nickel prisms, it's the first time we've seen twinned calcite mentioned.
Yes.
But
Yes.
just I guess brief physics thing. If you have a crystal that's growing, crystals grow geometrically. You can have them grow completely symmetrically, and in fact, I think that's probably more common for something like calcite. And so, like when you're talking about the way that optical calcite polarizes light, if the twin is there, it's going to flip it back at least another 90 degrees, so it's a full 180. Or I'm sure it depends exactly on the orientation, so it might flip it back to the right way up. Don't know what that means.
We always love a physics lesson, though. I do also really love this paragraph on 391 that starts with, "In the depths of the calcite now." Without waiting too long at all, he saw, or later would say he thought he saw, Sloat Fresno, and exactly where Sloat had to be. No comparable message about Deuce, however. A couple years later, when he would run into Ubal again and told him about this, Ubal would frown in a slightly mischievous way. Shouldn't it have been a little, I don't know, more spiritual than that? Deep wisdom, ancient truth, light from beyond, all that comes of it, one more cantina shooting? Pretty darn bleak for some magical crystal, isn't it? It's really funny because when you read this chapter for the first time, a lot of that doesn't really read in the way that it should to someone reading it with fresh eyes. And then, of course, when you go back through the chapter again, you realize that it is prefiguring the fact that Sloat is going to be shot at the end of the chapter, but also B, it is sort of indicting Frank as lying about what he saw, and instead trying to add a spiritual element to him finding Sloat at the end of the chapter. And that instead of it being dumb luck or something, no, he was guided there. And of course, as we get to the shooting here in just a couple of pages, sorry for everyone who's, I don't know, reading this in real time with the recording. He doesn't end up feeling very satisfied by the shooting. And so I think it's a really clever bit of character work here that Pynchon, again, before a first-time reader even knows what this is referring to, is informing his reader that Frank feels so kind of unfulfilled by this action that he will later try to add a spiritual spin to it. I find that to be a truly remarkable bit of writing. That to have that foresight in construction, it's just genius. Again, to get back to like what Luke was talking about earlier, it allows for some ambiguity of what he actually saw, that he is choosing to reclassify as this encounter with where Sloat is at. Why he feels the need to represent it somewhere. It is a really, really, really fucking impressive bit that he does in one paragraph with a stellar joke at the end of it. That is one of maybe the best examples I can think of how his talent as a writer makes me seethingly jealous as another writer that exists. To come up with something like that is it's very, very smart.
If it helps your envy, I've slowly been gaining a hunch as we go through this book, and it might be because we're taking so damn long. but I'm slowly starting to see a vision of this book being compiled out of thousands of index cards, a la Nabokov,
Oh, sure.
which makes that kind of like foreshadowing slightly less impressive on a technical level, but much funnier to imagine.
Yeah, just a billion note cards laid out on the attic of Pynchon's apartment or something.
It's got like an entire bookcase full of those little organizers.
Yeah, either that or the greatest sort of string and tackboard conspiracy wall that you've ever seen in your life.
It's index cards on string.
Yeah. So after he looks into the crystal, um, we get a reference to something that is called the globe cactus. According to El Espinero, the plant was still alive. Frank couldn't recall ever eating something while it was alive. So after this kind of experience he has, the spirituality gets doubled down a bit as he continues on with these indigenous folks. He has brought one of these cactuses, and it is very clear that this is a reference to mescaline or whatever word you may want to apply to it. And so Frank takes it and he goes on a trip. Just one of several in this book. I really did not think that the most sort of psychedelic drug consumption in any of Pynchon's books, from a perspective of characters consuming it and then their trips being sort of detailed or the effects of them being detailed, was going to be this book.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. What do we make of his trip here across page 293 and 294?
393 and 394.
390, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, we've been reading this book a long time.
No, I really enjoyed it. It's a fantastically written section. I ended up underlining a ton of different sections of it just because of the beauty of the writing. I specifically love the mention of the water that belonged to everyone that was then taken by quote they,
Yeah.
as the doppelganger Estrella mentions, which is kind of, obviously indicative of the whole concept of, we had this source of life that was free, and then people decided to be shitheads and hoard it and then sell it back to us because that's what evil people do. It's incredibly fitting. I think it's fun that he has a trip that involves him gaining even more anti-capitalist sentimentality than he already had going into it.
Beyond like being kind of, I don't know, I do get a little bit tired of the taking hallucinogens and then going to a different world or experiencing something like a dream rather than being in your own body and experiencing, increased sensation or whatever. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like the small section, as much as I love it, it is more of a dream sequence than anything else.
Yeah, the longest of many in this chapter.
Yeah, and it's just that trope, that kind of cliche thing that Western media does, at least. I'm not sure about drug portrayals in Eastern media, I guess, but from my experience with Western media, it can be a bit annoying sometimes, just because I do sometimes wonder how much that, like, 'cause that only really happens if you're like smoking like a bunch of like DMT or something, like, or salvia or something.
Yeah, like pretty heavy duty psychedelics.
Yeah, like stuff that not everyone's gonna be interested in, I guess. I don't know. I do wonder how much that kind of harms or makes people think that these drugs are more dangerous than they actually are. Anyways, I mean, it is beautifully written, I guess, and I do really love that. The discussion of like, like the water and the cave, and the desert and all of that is really fun. We get the kind of another reimagining of the word they, how it relates to, like resource management and stuff. So
I think to kind of go back on what you were mentioning about the tropiness of this, I think I would generally agree with that statement, but I think that because this is working and operating on a sort of pastiche of Western novels, that's the purpose of having it that way. I think Pynchon would know better that that's not how it actually happens, but that's how it happens in these kind of novels. And so it's kind of necessary to frame it in that way so that he can have his sort of vision quest and kind of wrap up that part of his arc as he gets to the next part when he gets to Frank. Or not
Good
to
point.
Frank, sorry, to Sloat.
I'm gonna throw in my my 2 cents, I guess, and it's that I don't think this is one of those cliche instances. I get what you're saying, Luke, and I agree pretty much entirely. But I do read if there's one thing I've heard that differentiates mescaline in general from peyote in particular, it is more out of body experiences. Um, and one thing that I think is kind of notable is that this scene starts with him essentially it kicks in and he goes into a fit of vomiting, which is definitely what happens with cactus-based psychedelia for the most part.
Yes.
And one thing that I think is kind of universal and maybe like the only thing that really unites everything that can be reasonably called a psychedelic is that in that period of like vomiting and being just in that altered state of like crisis, memory formation can start to be really fragmented, and the what we have is a character who spent the last like month just traveling around Mexico aimlessly, and then he takes peyote and he vomits everything in his stomach out, probably more than he has in his stomach, and probably lays there for a while in this like hallucinatory, like dream-like psychedelic state. And I think that's the kind of scenario where you are going to imagine yourself flying over a landscape. And then the next thing we get later on the ground, that feels like memory consolidation has started to kick back in and he is walking around. And so whatever conversation he might have had, he's placed back onto this experience of the landscape underneath him, which was only, 30 seconds of him with his eyes shut. That's how I read it, at least.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I do like that 'cause I assume that Frank and Estrella had kind of an off-page romance, partially because of this section. But this is kind of the one glimpse we get of their relationship. Um, and I do find it interesting that, like I guess even while he's pretty clearly hallucinating, she's still like kind of leading him, through the trip, which is cool and stuff. I do like that. As we kind of been over the indigenous people, like I do find them very like likable, and the way they treat Frank is really fun.
Absolutely. And I think sort of not to play Goldilocks, but I think that all three of you have commented on something that is present within that trip. Of like, yes, it does fulfill a slot within the kind of acid western genre or this kind of pastiche. Um, yes, it does likely accurately depict, how these things are going, but then also, yes, it does also operate on like a cliche level of its presence within this kind of narrative. So I think that all three of you have recognized something true about why this is in the chapter. And I couldn't agree with any of you guys more. You all stated something very well there.
That's it. We won podcasting. We won. We got it.
We all individually arrived at a different conclusion that supports a main thesis.
Yes.
I do also love, in addition to the detail of like accurately depicting the fact that you vomit before something like this really takes off, I do also love that at the end, when his trip is over, it says it would someday be relegated as well to the register of experiences he had been unable to find any use for. I think that does describe a very is that does describe a type of psychedelic experience that you can have. That it was something very profound. It meant a lot in the moment, and it really kind of shifted the way you thought about things, in some way. But also, it is an experience that maybe you don't have an immediate use for, and also don't know how to explain to anybody. It is one example of how the psychedelic drugs, as depicted in this book, I think capture some truths, in the sense that, like, the cyclamite thing may not be a great depiction of necessarily what it's like to be on acid, but the description of the fractals that happen when he cuts into the steak is a very good description of what it's like to be on acid. Certain elements of this are a good description of what it's like to be on certain psychedelics. It's it's neat to see something like that, because, like Luke is talking about, often a lot of these drugs are portrayed in a way that is just wholly unrealistic to what it is actually like if you take them in real life.
Well, and to to kind of bring this all home, to tie this back to what I think we talked about in the last episode, the first sentence on the next page is literally a description of green and purple. So that's still here.
However, that is also just what sunset and sunrise are like.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it is still there.
Yeah, and my charge is that the people who are talking about this are just remembering coming off acid at nighttime or in the early morning.
Right.
That's my contention. I'm dying on that hill too. You have to split me up.
The other thing I wanted to add, I know I've talked about this ad nauseum throughout this book, but if anyone reading this is like me and has music on while you read, I cannot stress enough how great Hermanos Gutierrez hits with this book, and this scene especially. Like, holy shit, it clicked into place so well with the track that I just happened to be listening to at that time. So if nothing else, just like go back and reread this chapter with them on in the background, and it just elevates it so well.
Was there a particular album or song you wanted to recommend?
Any of them really.
Okay.
I think the one I was listening to at the time I read this, the album is called El Bueno y El Malo. Came out in 2022. So check that album out. Just put it on in the background while you read. It's great. And it fits this vibe so well.
Very
I did
nice.
want to get more into the experiences he had been unable to find any use for. Beyond just kind of generally being amused by that and identifying it with it some, as somebody who at least used to take hallucinogens more just to kind of have a good time than, not, I mean, there's times it was just kind of like, just why not? And I just wanted to party basically.
Sometimes you just want to have a good time listening to music.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't always have to be some deep, profound thing, and the deep, profound things that you realize are not always deep and profound the next day. But I do, like, in relation to his actual vision, and specifically the part about the idea that the water should be everywhere, free to everybody. It was life. And if you got greedy, like that as a metaphor, or that as a truth, like, what is Frank gonna do about that? Like, Frank already kind of innately probably knows the fact that wealth is being concentrated increasingly at higher levels, while poor people in the middle class are not necessarily increasing their wealth in the same way. That was true then, it's true now. But what am I supposed to do about it? I mean, what is Frank supposed to do about it? He doesn't necessarily want to follow in his dad's footsteps, it seems. Reef, I guess, was going to try to get him to follow in his dad's footsteps, but I don't know if Frank would have actually been interested. But yeah, I mean, there's stuff that happens all the time in the news where I think, that's a big deal. That's horrible, but, like, what am I supposed to really do about it? I guess I don't know.
And that is why the FBI didn't want Mickey Wolfman consuming LSD. Because he was actually capable of doing something about it.
Yeah, good point.
But no, you're right. You're right. I think that does summarize a lot of the type of experiences or a type of experience that you can have with those drugs, where it's like, yeah, Yeah, war is bad. We should all live harmoniously. But what can you do about that? Pynchon would probably point you in the direction of small everyday acts, but Frank is not going to individually be able to solve that problem.
Sure,
Yeah,
celery is going to bring 1,000 years of peace on Earth, but how is it going to do that?
and there is that part in Shadow Ticket, like near the end, where it seems like he's talking about like realizing things or I forget the exact quote. I think we did go over it in our Shadow Ticket episode, but there's some quote from the near the end that I interpreted at least as being like somebody older who sees that like all of society's problems and realizes that they could have done more when they were young. I do kind of relate that maybe a bit to this too, with like Frank realizes that the world is messed up, but in the moment he doesn't really seem to want to do much about it, and maybe in the future when he's older he might feel differently about that.
Yeah, that's a good way to unite those two texts together. After he recovers from his trip, we get him and uh, Estrella separating. Frank heading on his sort of own merry way. Um, I do also if we haven't already beaten the psychedelics conversation to death, love the inclusion on 394, where he asks for more of it, and it talks about how let's see here on 394, El Espinero pointed, laughing at a cactus near Frank's foot, and he and the women rode away laughing for quite some time, actually, till they were over the ridgeline and out of earshot. Apologizing to the cactus as the Bruja had instructed him, Frank removed it live from its home earth and stashed it in his saddlebag. In days to come, he would take it out for a nibble or sometimes only to look at and wait for instructions, but he was never to have quite the same certitude again as he had felt flying with Estrella over the teeming high desert or braving the stone grimness below it. It's I like that because again, in a chapter that is about to a big extent, especially with the calcite, as you talked about, Cody, about the difference between spiritual practice and the same elements being used for non-spiritual practice. Him, I don't want to say abusing the mescaline, but using it in a different way that is separated from what was very clearly like an indigenous spiritual practice that he was kind of allowed in on in that moment, doesn't produce the same results. And that is very much true of certain psychedelics. That there are many accounts you can read of people feeling like they have used them in incorrect ways or used them in ways that are less reverential than they should be, and as a result, the experience that they have changes. So it's another case of again that divide between spirituality and practice in spirituality and not. Some maybe one could say recreationally, and another sort of aspect of some drug use in this realm that seems to ring true for people.
I do like that he seems to be microdosing it
Yeah,
in the days to come.
yeah.
Very
Frank
very
was the
prescient.
original microdoser.
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, from my own experiences with microdosing, more LSD than anything, I guess. I mean, it actually, because you don't have to struggle with like thought loops as much, and like you're not so like immersed in sensation. It can actually, I feel like, it can be a more spiritual or like at least more clear headed, while still kind of retaining some of that spiritual or like connectedness feeling. I don't know.
I'm a big fan of microdosing, but I
Mhm.
honestly I'm very cautious. First of all, because of all the people who use it as like a performance enhancer, which I guess to each their own. But also like I've had many experiences taking like zero point 0.1 gram of mushrooms and then still having the goddamn peak experience. It just lasts for 20 minutes instead of an hour.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and
it's definitely your mileage may vary.
I have heard that the whatever the drug is in the cactus, that it's like not evenly distributed too.
Yeah, and just a PSA: unless you are very responsible about it, um, don't go looking for peyote. Don't go stealing it. Don't. It grows way too slowly. If you want to just get high and it's not something that you're spending a lot of time preparing for, don't go kill a 50-year-old plant for something that is probably going to be a lot like LSD. Go buy some other cactus if you really want to, or if you happen to know people who grow it. Don't be irresponsible and make this damn plant go extinct because you want to have a high. Treat it with respect.
Yep. Couldn't have said it better myself. All of this does, of course, lead us to the sort of denouement of the chapter. And that is when Frank, now on his own, rolls into a random cantina. And who does he see there but Sloat Fresno, sitting, seeming to enjoy a beer, and he shoots him dead. I think that if there is one section of this book that has impressed me the most, or that has been most kind of affecting to this point, it is the paragraph that begins with "It came to pass" on 395. It is so masterfully written, and as we kind of talked about at the beginning of the chapter, it is satisfying for me. I understand that it is not satisfying for Frank, because I hate Deuce and Sloat in a way that I have not hated since freaking Hector in the Iliad. That was the last time that I experienced just visceral annoyance at a character. And so seeing one of them get shot in this way, entirely random, giving him no opportunity to even defend himself, shot so badly that he flies backwards in his chair on the floor.
And breaks the leg on the chair.
Yeah, breaks the leg on the chair, and then his body is looted. It was just such a, for me, satisfying conclusion to that particular villain's arc in this story. I only can hope the same fate befalls Deuce, because I hate him more. But it was one of those things where I could see what Pynchon was sort of working towards and indicating towards over the course of the chapter, but it still surprised me when it came up. Like when Frank just looks in the canteen and sees Deuce sitting there, I felt like I had the same level of surprise that he did.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not easy to do. It's not easy to leave breadcrumbs for your reader and then still surprise them when the breadcrumb trail reaches its destination. But it's just it is so well written from that paragraph really through to the end of the chapter. I loved it.
Yeah, I think part of its effectiveness lies in the fact that it's not a. It's been a slow burn up to here, and he doesn't play it out more than he needs to.
Yeah.
I think a lot of other authors would be tempted to, make it this cat and mouse game at this point of like this big epic shootout, or Frank is stalking him and trying to get the right opportunity and the right moment to like have his final monologue and this and that and the other. But no, it's just, this is the end. This is his chance right here, right now. Do it or don't do it. It's going to happen, and it happens, and it's so quick and just dead bang, and then it's over. And he can't, like you said, he can't enjoy it because now he's still paranoid because Deuce is still out there, and nobody knows where he is or if he's going to come back. So he has, he's still on high guard and can't even like savor the moment that he has right now, even when he's offered the souvenirs of his dead body. He's just still high strung at the moment, and it's so. I mean, you could really kind of tie it into the whole doubling thing and the duality thing of, it's so cathartic for us as a reader, but it is the almost opposite for him. It was a necessary thing to happen, but it's not done for him. and
Yeah.
it might not ever be done at this point. We don't know if you're reading this for the first time. So it's brilliant. I absolutely love it.
I really like how you tied that into the reader versus the character in terms of doubling. That's very intelligent. And like you're right in that it's not just a lack of satisfaction with the deed. It is also the vigilance of the dead, like of there being another one and him not knowing what to do now. It's also the vigilance of the fact that he's committed a murder very publicly.
Yeah.
And so, could at some point end up in jail for that after just getting out of jail. But then I think it's smart that Pynchon, as the chapter ends, at the top of the very next page, takes it out to the fact that also his soul is not satisfied with this. That like what he probably assumed would provide him with some degree of solace or a feeling of justice in some way has not done that. It has instead just left him feeling empty, which feels like a very, as someone who has never killed anyone, but has heard the platitude talked about in terms of revenge not being as satisfying as you think, that in committing an act of violence like that isn't going to bring you the peace you think it is. It's portrayed very excellently by the way that the chapter itself ends.
One of the things that I think is so incredible about that big paragraph that both has been mentioned a few times, rightfully, it first of all, strictly formal level, Sloat is mentioned basically halfway through, and it is like Cody I think mentioned. It is a moment, and it's a moment in like a true way, and it's not like, oh, we're getting weird narrative meandering contemplating what happened in that moment, and they're not getting Frank's story he tells himself. What we're getting is stream of consciousness that we're just kind of dropped into, and it's a stream of consciousness that depicts for Frank the act of recognition is the act of decision. He sees the man and he fires, and that is all there is to it. And I don't know, for me at least, that's where it comes across as unsatisfying on a personal emotional level. Is it does feel like, yeah, no, it's been building up, and it's like it's over. Finn, right still in the middle of the paragraph. Finn.
Yeah.
Like yeah.
More time is dedicated to describing the artwork on the walls of the cantina than it is to the death of one of the principal villains of the book.
Yeah. Well, it's almost more content spent describing those murals than there is any amount of time after Frank shoots him. Like it's almost more of that, which is it again highlights why it's so effective in the moment. But it's so abrupt and it's so heavy, like, because it's not really dark. It isn't really dark. You don't, sure, he's running for his life, but he's just been told that the guy left a while ago. He didn't say he was coming back. And it's not terribly sinister, at least the way I read the very end, but it is just, well, that's done, I guess.
Yeah. This is over now.
Yeah, one of the essays in the Pensions Against the Day, a Corrupted Pilgrim's Guide, spend a lot of time talking about the No Budweiser Little Bighorn Panoramas Here line specifically. I guess that Budweiser really did have a poster type thing portraying Little Bighorn that they distributed across America. That's just kind of a small detail. I don't know if it was distributed in Mexico. I can't remember if they specified that in that essay, but they do. I did actually find it really interesting, kind of the history of that, despite it seeming to be kind of a small detail. So if anyone's interested more in that small detail, I would check out that book. That entire paragraph is really fun and some of the best prose. I mean, the prose in this chapter I've really loved in general. I did mean to bring up the fact that it does kind of remind me of some of Cormac McCarthy's novels, specifically The Crossing. In that, there's a lot of nature description in this chapter of northern Mexico or central Mexico. There's kind of glances at spirituality and mysticism as well, which The Crossing gets a lot into. And and it's the kind of the prose is the closest to McCarthy that I feel like Pynchon has gotten, at least in this book so far. There's been a few different times in this chapter where the phrasing has been really interesting. There's one part where he says like what it is that, which but the phrasing at the end of this chapter, at that final paragraph, it's pretty complicated, but it's really, ending the chapter on the word regret. It does seem to be that sentence is so complicated just so he can end it on the word regret.
Mhm.
Which is a very interesting way to end a chapter that, the climax is something you would think that Frank would not regret. Yeah, I don't know. And it is, the kind of the whole Vision Quest acid Western thing, like it does seem to be, it does make a lot of sense in retrospect that he would just kind of happen upon Sloat. Especially because, he's been given a vision of where he could find him. It's not specified, I guess, if that vision came true, although we have no reason to doubt that, Frank was consciously or unconsciously guided there in some way or recognized it whenever he saw it, which isn't stated, but seems to be implied.
As far as sort of the wrap-up stuff go, was there any funny moments that we didn't talk about as we were covering the chapter? I realize that there are a lot of there's a lot of stuff in Spanish over the course of this chapter that are either like jokes or funny ways that people are referring to one another.
Mhm.
Did anyone either have specifics of that they wanted to share or anything else?
I wanted to circle back to the introduction of Joaquin.
Okay.
I'm afraid we kind of glossed over his
We did a little
his
bit. That's
introduction
true.
because on 385, I'm just going to read his introduction. And this is Joaquin El Nato smiling up at the bird. Tell them something about yourself, mijo. I like to fuck the gringo pussy, confided the parrot. How's that? U-Ball blinking at the bird's theatrical British accent, recalling somehow vaudeville Shakespeare and profligate nights. Just the idea that this bird, this incredibly foul-mouthed bird, is making these jokes about like in quasi Spanish at times, but in a theatrical British accent, is just hilarious to me. It's a terrible joke. It's just funny that it's doing it in a British accent. I don't know why. I love that.
Yeah, I do think that we did kind of skate over how funny Joaquin is in general. Is he bilingual? Because he inserts Spanish into
He
his.
definitely throws it in every now and then. Yeah.
He would
which
appear to be bilingual.
because he speaks English very well for a resident of, a bird resident of Mexico.
Yeah.
And then the whole like Zacatecas, Guanajuato, I Chihuahua
Mm-hmm.
thing is pretty funny. The fact that it does play into the themes of this chapter and of this section and of the book as well.
And it's also situated around Frank's pretending to light a stick of dynamite in the tent, which is a pretty funny scene as well.
Yeah, that is true.
All the little like Spanish language jokes are really, they're just like the goofy kind of phrasing that people say to keep themselves entertained when they say the same things over and over again to the same people.
Yeah.
It really is like they call it out in the wiki. I guess really the El Famoso Chavalito del Quisilgur thing, where it is, I think that is how you would translate it, is Chavalito, but Chavo is usually the word that would be kid. But it's, the whole point of him being called the Quisilgur kid is to diminize? Nope, that's not it. Doesn't matter. You got what I wanted to say. But it is things like that. It's the things like U-Ball saying, "See you in a little bit, little itsy bit," when they part ways.
Yeah.
It's just nice.
All right, that brings us to quotes. This is you really have a field day with this one.
Yeah. Who wants to read the scene where Sloat dies? Because that's got to be somebody's.
If it was still available after you, I was going to read that.
It's I think there's an argument to be made that all four of us might have picked that, but I don't want to be the one to steal it. So the obvious choice here is the death scene of Sloat, page 395. It came to pass that one day Frank rode in out of some irrigated cotton fields at the edge of the Bolson de Mapimi, down in the daylight single street of a little pueblo whose name he would soon forget. Walked into a particular cantina as if he'd been a regular for years. Adobe walls, perpetual 4 a.m. gloom, abiding fumes of pulque in the room. No Budweiser Little Bighorn panoramas here, no. Instead, some crumbling mural of the Aztec foundation story of the eagle and the serpent, here perversely showing the snake coiled around the eagle and just about to dispatch it, and posed presentably among that old-time scenery, watching the struggle, a number of attractive senoritas with 19th century hairdos and the painter's ideas of Aztec outfits, the walls otherwise undecorated, missing paint and chips and scars from long ago gunplay or thrown furniture, and found there, right in front of him, sitting slouched and puffy-faced and as if waiting, the no longer elusive Sloat Fresno, quick as that, with his pistol already somehow in his hand, giving Frank time only to find his own and begin firing cold. No chance to rouse up any of those family emotions. None of that. Old Sloat, who maybe never even recognized him, failing as it turned out even to get off one shot, blown over backward, one of the chair legs breaking under his already dead weight, so he was sent into a half spin, throwing a dark slash of blood that trailed in the air and feathered in a crescent slap, unheard in the noise of the shots. Across the ancient soiling of the Puquiera floor, Finn, a prolonged and shallow breathing stillness of burnt powder, smoke rising, ears humming, black Mexican eyeballs seemingly bent upon the newly induced member of the dead, though everybody would recognize Frank if they saw him again, in case anybody came around to ask in the proper way. We failed to mention that that's like 3 sentences.
Yep.
That whole up until Finn is one sentence. That's part of what makes that so goddamn effective. It's just once that scene starts, it does not let up until it is done. And I just love it so much.
It is truly great. My quote comes from 377. It's when they get arrested. Semana Santa rolled around and nobody worked that week, so Frank and Yuval had a chance to wander the town in search of trouble they hadn't tried yet. Because the streets were narrow as alleyways and ran between high walls, most of the town was in some kind of shadow. Looking for sunlight, they headed uphill, and soon, rounding a corner, Frank was gripped by the strangest feeling of having been there before. I dreamed this, he said. Yuval narrowed his eyes some. What's up there? Something to do with Deuce. He's here? Hell, just a dream. Yub, come on. They climbed up the red-brown mountainside into sunlight and purple artemisia, where wild dogs wandered the roofless stones till they were high enough to see, beyond the harsh radiance of the Good Friday sky, where cirrus clouds were blown to long, fine, parallel streaks. The city below spread east to west, stunned as if by mysterious rays to a silence even Frank and Yuval must honor. The Passion of Christ, the windless hush, even the stamping mills were silent, even silver itself taking its day of rest, as if to recognize the price Judas Iscariot received. Sunlight in the trees. There's a lot of good nature writing, and it's that last paragraph that is specifically the quote I wanted to read, but I just wanted to include the kind of setting of it. It's it's not just good nature writing, but again, it's the evocation of this like spiritual thing that he's doing over the course of the whole chapter. And like, we don't know what it was in the dream that he saw or what it had to do with Deuce, but obviously it does have something to do with Deuce because it is what kicks off the events of the rest of the chapter that lead him to killing Sloat, who is of course Deuce's sort of double or alter. So it's just really good. It's a really good encapsulation of a lot of the things that this chapter does well.
I just realized that we missed a huge comedy bit. But
Did we?
we did. So I'm gonna read that out to get it clean before I respond to what Kate just finished reading out. ¡Qué guapa! ¡Qué tetas fantásticas, verdad?
Yeah, we did. We missed that.
Yep. Anywho. I was really considering that section, Kate, so thank you for reading it, because I don't think I would have ended up going with it. it really is a beautiful set of like scenes. But I'm going to go with a not too far from it, starting on 379, the very tail end there. Someday, maybe, after we get out of here, but who's in any hurry for that? Tell the truth, neither one of them. This place was just a dream, so peaceful compared to what they'd been brought here down out of. Peaceful as the city above looked from great distances, but never up close managed to sound. No drunken miners or unannounced blasting, the beating of the stamp mills all night coming through the rock here muted in polyrhythms as persuasive to sleep as the constant flow of sea to a crewman bunking below the waterline at the edges of sleep's blessed vegetable patch. Down here, workaday anxieties were brushed away, while opportunities for recreation went ever unfolding in a parade of subterranean attractions. A cantina complete with music and fandango girls, a small Nickelodeon theater, or actually, Centavo de On, roulette and faro, grifa peddlers, and opium joints staffed by elements of the Chinese community topside, suites of guest rooms luxurious as any in town, with the underground equivalent of a balcony from which one could view, it seemed for miles, the smoke-darkened walls and iron-riveted watchtowers and the brown corridors often roofless of this increasingly cozy captivity, with few of your usual knifers and drunks and mining town riffraff. No, given the national politics at the moment unfolding, the other detainees here seemed more like, what would you call them, honest working stiffs with a dangerous light in their eyes. Outspoken professors, rogue científicos as well. Nor did certain Husgau dynamics, such as those to do with one's rectal integrity, even seem to apply here, which did simplify the day for the two North Americans. Which, it's Pynchon doing his list thing, which I think is great. It's also Pynchon doing his thing where he, shows the downtrodden as normal people, both explicitly and pretty less explicitly leading up to the explicit mention, because really something that's kind of being shown there is, well, it used to be that when you locked someone up in a jail, they would just be miserable. We can't do that anymore. We have to try to make it miserable.
Mhm.
Or at the very least, they have so many people in this jail that it's just collapsed into a society of its own, which, maybe that's a different interpretation. Maybe it's the same one. I don't really care. It's really beautiful to read.
Yeah, that was going to be mine, actually.
No, I'm sorry.
The cascading of
Yeah.
stolen quotes. I love it.
I really like the at the edges of Sleep's Blessed vegetable patch. In particular, it
Yeah.
does. It's kind of Shakespearean, kind of just 60s ish, kind of like granola type stuff. I mean but it's like kind of funny. It's evocative. I really like that phrase. I did manage to find another one. So mine is on 380. Or I did want to highlight that I do think that on 387, the giving in at late the parrot hysteria, sinister in its prolonged indifference is just a great sentence. Anyway, so the quote is from 386. So they pitch camp outside of town near a bridge over an arroyo. The wind funneling down the ravine never quit all the time they were there. Street lights came on early in the dark brown afternoons and sometimes stayed on all the next day. Frank, seeming to enter a partial vacuum in the passage of time, found half a minute to ask himself if this was really where he ought to be. It was such an unexpected question that he decided to consult with U-Ball, who was squatting next to a Maxim gun broken down into bits and pieces on a blanket and trying to remember how to get it back together. The middle of that paragraph is just I really like the seeming to enter a partial vacuum in the passage of time. I mean, I think we've all probably had some experience kind of like that where, we're just kind of doing whatever and then we kind of think like, wait, like why the fuck am I doing this? Or like why, why am I here? I've had that experience more like traveling solo or stuff like that, where it's just like, like why am I still here? Why am I not going and doing something else or something? I don't know. It's very, I mean, Frank is technically basically traveling. I mean, he's not necessarily trying to live in any of these places for a long period of times. It seems. And then I don't just the image of U-Ball sitting over a Maxim gun, that's a machine gun, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like the earliest machine gun.
Yeah, and him probably looking confused and trying to piece it together, like maybe like a baby tries to like bang stuff together. I don't know. It's kind of funny. image. I do think that U-Ball is he's not like super funny, but I do kind of get a vibe that he's not a super serious kind of guy. So I just like that paragraph too. And there's a bit of nature writing at the beginning, which I also liked.
If it helps, I did really consider that one too. So
We've come full circle.
What do we think the most pinch-on part of the chapter is? I sort of already revealed mine. It's that bit of character work that he did that I talked extensively about in terms of his sort of look into the crystal. So what did you guys think was yours?
I think if it's not that, for me to take it a little bit of a sillier route, it's the use of Joaquin to the use of a silly character to really hammer home an important part of that. Where in the scene where Joaquin and Frank are talking, and Joaquin's explaining to him explicitly, like, "Hey, this doubling thing is real. Like, there's no, don't make any mistakes about this. Like the names doubling and this doubling and that." To use such a goofy way of hammering that home to a character is a very pinch on thing to do, and I love that.
Mine is probably the dream sequence, or the like the peyote trip, because I mean the after Slothrop goes down the toilet in Gravity's Rainbow, it's kind of like a western for a while in Gravity's Rainbow, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
So this whole kind of like Vision Quest acid western thing, I do think the acid western concept came up in the Reddit group read for Gravity's Rainbow, I want to say, for that section. But yeah, I mean, that's a very just kind of penchant thing to do, is to have somebody take drugs and find like some truth about how like a certain few are hoarding something or something like that. Where even that's the themes, like the theme of that dream sequence, peyote trip does seem, or like the ultimate message of it does seem to be a similar message to Gravity's Rainbow like kind of general message that like there's a few people who are kind of dominating things, or there's like a small group of people who are accumulating a lot of wealth and stuff like that. And I mean, there's obviously the they thing too, which is always going to remind me of Gravity's Rainbow.
I'm just gonna say that the like sheer amount of like the amount of cultural stuff that's in here is so dense that it would be like crass if it weren't clearly from like personal experience. It would come across as like self parody with the amount like the fact that like you you know, to borrow a key phrase of yours, Kate, lesser authors would like name drop Pulque or something, but they're not gonna have multiple scenes take place in Pulqueria. They're not gonna have like Spanglish depicted the way that Spanglish is used in northern Mexico, and they're not gonna have like it really, it's all the little things that are just like, yeah, no, this is a this is a man who spent some time in the Old West. You didn't have to spend much time there, but he at least like did the historical reading and the novel reading and all that, and then he actually went out there and spent some time in a rural Mexican town. He actually just like picked up how people speak, which is not a unique thing of Pynchon's, but it is, I think, his most blessed trait that probably didn't come through quite as much hard work as some of the more like prosaic touches. But his use of dialogue or dialect is just unimpeachable as usual.
All right. So that brings us to a couple of listener questions. It looks like we have 3 emails and a YouTube comment this time. Who wants to take the really long one? I can read it if you guys would like.
This one's from Jimmy. Hi, Mapping the Zone, folks. Sorry in advance about the long email. First, I just wanted to say thank you for the hours and hours of parasocial enrichment you've brought me as I've worked my way through the pension books I had yet to read over the last couple years. I found the pod during the spring of 2024 when I had started reading Mason and Dixon for the first time. My wife and I were getting ready for our first baby when I started the book, and for whatever reason, I couldn't get my brain fully dialed in. I was enjoying the ride, but was thoroughly confused as fuck by probably about half of what I read in the first 150 to 200 pages. The pod helped me get on the right wavelength with the book, lock in, and I was enraptured by what he was doing with the forum by the time our boys made it to what would become this cursed country of ours. Anyway, I wanted to give my 2 cents about the name Wolftone O'Rooney from chapter 28 of ATD. Apologies if this was mentioned and I just missed it, but I don't think it was. Anyways, I thought the theory about the wolf tone in music was incredible and obviously very much intended, and I completely missed that when I was reading. However, there is also an important grounding in Irish history that works in concert with the other meaning. Wolfe Tone was an Irish nationalist from the late 18th century that is generally considered the father of radical Irish nationalism. There may be a better term for his legacy, I'm certainly not an expert. He formed the Society of United Irishmen, the group that led the 1798 rebellion against the British Crown. He was taken prisoner and killed himself when he attempted a beach landing on Ireland with a contingent of French troops. It could be that Pynchon is just giving a very literal nod to the father of Irish nationalism, but just accepting the simple answer is never fun. There are any number of prominent Irish nationalists. Pynchon could have named O'Rooney after from between the 1798 rebellion and the events of this chapter. When I consider what every story and the crushing encroachment of modernity in this novel is building towards, World War I, and the year chapter 28 takes place, probably 1903 to 1904, Wolfe Tone seems to serve a specific purpose. The Easter Uprising occurred in 1916 in the middle of World War I, ultimately leading to the Irish Revolution, independence from the Crown, the partition between the Irish Republic and Northern Ireland, and the Irish Civil War. Without doing any research to refresh myself on this, I know that at least some of the key leaders of the Easter Uprising would have been in the US at this time, raising support for their cause. My personal favorite of the leaders, James Connolly, was in the US as an IWW organizer and traveling lecturer, speaking on socialism and Irish nationalism. In placing a radical Irish nationalist named Wolftone O'Rooney in the US in 1903 to 1904, Pynchon is detailing an entire history of the line that runs from the father of Irish nationalism and the 1798 revolution to the Easter Uprising and Irish independence. It's infuriating how good he is at this. Patrick Pearse, maybe Percy, one of the leaders of the Easter Uprising, gave a quote that seems very relevant to what Pynchon may be doing. Speaking at Wolftone's grave in 1913, he said he, meaning Wolftone, made articulate the dumb voices of centuries. He gave Ireland a clear and precise and worthy concept of nationality. But he did more than this. Not only did he define Irish nationalism, but he armed his generation in defense of it. One other, maybe vaguely interesting note on Wolftone that has the loosest of tie-ins to Mason and Dixon. He lived in Philadelphia for a time in the 1790s. While he was in the US, he met with George Washington. He quickly became disillusioned with the US as an aristocracy of money and Washington's lack of support for the French Revolution. That's what I've got. Thanks for all the work you all do. Yeah, that email points out a lot of stuff that I think we miss. And it goes into a lot more like kind of depth than the Pynchon Wiki does, I think, on the name.
Mm-hmm.
I do like that somebody in the 1790s becoming disillusioned with the U.S. as an aristocracy of money seems to be a little early in our history to be coming to that conclusion, but it's a prescient conclusion to come to. And yeah, I like that email. It was very informative.
I'll just say, as the resident researcher for this show who missed that episode, I appreciate you doing my job for. He was one of the people in my notes. Unfortunately, I was not able to come to that episode, so I appreciate you sending us that information. Will, do you want to read the follow-up on Wolf Tone from the other listener?
Sure. So next we've got one from looks like Duncan. Hey all, just wanted to write in on the topic of Wolf Tone Rooney. I think the discussion you had about his name is probably also true, but I think that he's almost certainly named after the 18th century Irish revolutionary Wolf Tone as well. Love the show. Well, thank you, Duncan, for writing in. I'll explain. I'll explain ourselves. We got the thanks done with Jimmy's excellent informative email. So I'll just say I'm this is what went through my head, and I'm sure Cody also thought this. Oh, it's on the Pynchon wiki. We don't need to mention this. And also, Kate was supposed to be on the recording. We tend to leave her the juicy things like that. But thank you. We appreciate the notification as well.
This is why I asked you to read that email, because I knew you were gonna have something funny to say.
I don't think he deserves ridicule, but I can't help. I just can't help.
We also got an email from Max who says, "Hi guys, you were left puzzled by Bob Meldrum's wife La Blanca in one of your recent episodes. In my reading, she is the embodiment of death. Pale horse, dark cape, pale face, dark eye sockets all fit the description. Bob giving her floral-themed scarf is the Pynchonian humor cherry on top. She instills fear in the man. However, none have actually met her or haven't had a chance to tell the tale. The youth especially seems not to grasp her nature. Elmore Disco is scared of her coming to town, I assume because she is bad for business. A marriage between her and Bob is assumed on the basis of Bob's violent nature. Moreover, death is one of the major tarot arcana. Speaking of tarot, the Wardenclyffe Tower is designed to send electricity into the earth, as depicted on a reversed tower card. Thank you again for your podcast. I will probably write again when you cover Göttingen. My brother studied and lives there, so it might be time to visit him and some historical sites. Max. Thank you. Your theory on La Blanca makes sense, and is a testament to how, even 4 people poring over this text and doing a 4-hour episode on it, still we're not going to get everything, which is why we always ask for you guys to email us your thoughts. Similar to your sort of mentions there on a reversed tower card. I feel especially stupid for not realizing that, because the tower is probably my favorite tarot card. So much so that a friend of mine bought me a giant tower-shaped candle. One of those ones that you're not actually supposed to burn, but is mostly decorative. It's a great point. And lastly, Cody, do you want to read this YouTube comment that you found?
Sure do. We got a comment on our Mason and Dixon chapters 11 through 15 episode from Andrew 5138 that says, "Please stop tapping the pen." Done.
Time travel has been achieved, and we've
Thank
been able to
you.
go back in time to fix
Yeah.
that.
Thank you for asking politely. It has been addressed.
It was nearly 3 years ago. You know what, Andrew? I think it's really funny that we read this comment on the first episode in quite a while that I've been clicking a pen aimlessly in the background. I don't know if any of it will get picked up on the recording, but if it does, that one's for you, buddy. All right. That brings us to the end of this episode. Next up, I don't need to give you page numbers. Read to the end of Iceland Spar. I didn't think that we would get this far. I genuinely thought we were going to be reading Iceland Spar forever, given that that I'm fairly certain we have been going through this section for 9 months or something crazy like that at this point.
Yeah. It might have even been longer than that, honestly.
Might have even been longer.
Just all the crazy shit that went down, and I moved halfway across the country.
Yeah. I think it's really funny that as sort of a cohort here. The joke that the podcast wouldn't survive against the day was one regularly made by all four of us, and then as soon as we started against the day, the most sort of strugglesome period for not just one host, by the way, multiple hosts of the show.
I think we've all had shit.
Yeah, has happened. It is the universe has really been putting us through our paces with this book and this section of the book in particular. That being said, I do want to I give a great shout out to all of our listeners for the patience as we have gone through that. Even just the 1 week difference between last podcast and this episode. Yeah, something's been in the water since we started this, and it seems like hopefully we're leaving that in the realm of Iceland Spar, and are instead going to step into a new world that is maybe a bit less chaotic. And so yeah, thank you for listening. This has truly been, this section of the book has truly been, I think, some of the best work that we have done as a podcast on any of the books that we've covered, in terms of information and analysis, and the four of us sharing different thoughts over the course of these recordings. So it's been really quite an experience, especially for me as having not read the book before, going through this in the way that we have. Thank you to you guys, and thank you to the listeners, for those of you who are listening to each and every episode, and just those of you who are bearing with us as we move through a book that is putting us through our paces in more way than one.
And we will have a wrap up for part 2, with hopefully a special guest on. We're still working on lining something up, but we do want to do something special for that. So keep an eye out for that, and then we'll also, as we have done in the past, we'll do a bonus episode of some other non-pinch on books that we're all big fans of.
And the next story in Slow Learners.
Yep.
Yeah.
So lots of different things coming to to kind of break the monotony. We also, Kate and I, have our side show about Infinite Jest, the most recent episode of which just came out today, March 1st. So if you have any inclination to go and listen to our thoughts on the first 105 pages of that book, go give it a listen. It was a lot of fun to record.
And if you like this show or the other show or any of the shows that we may do in the future, you think it's worth $1, we would love to have it. And any funds that you choose to donate to us over on our Ko-Fi project at ko-fi.com/mappingthezone will be used to pay hosting fees and for equipment and books and things that we need in order to run the show. Thank you to everybody who has donated, especially over the past, I would say, 2 months. There's been a huge uptick of support over there. And so thank you to each and every one of you who's donated a couple of bucks to help us keep making the show. If you want to get in touch with us at any of our sort of URLs, there's plenty of ways to do so. You can email us at mappingthezonepod@gmail.com. It's going to be the best way to get a hold of us. We can also be found on Twitter at PinchOnPod, on Blue Sky at mappingthezone.bsky.social, on Instagram at mappingthezonepodcast. And if you like this shirt enough to advertise it on your body, we do have merchandise at mappingthezone.myspreadshop.com. There will be, I am working out the final design choices for all of you Infinite Jesters out there, a shirt that we are going to be releasing very soon, that promotes the Enfield Tennis Academy using its original slogan before the death of its founder. So that is going to be our newest piece of merch. But as always, before that, we had our wonderful logo made by Brad per second, available on shirts and bags and mugs and stickers and coffee commuter mugs and all sorts of stuff. So we have plenty available if you should want to support us in a different way than a direct donation. And until next time, thank you all for listening.
Bye.
Bye.
See ya.